OpsTok, Thought Leadership and Technology in Operations, with your hosts Sahand and Tom. Special guest John Newbury, Operational Excellence Consultant.
Hi, everybody. Glad to have you with us here today. I'm Sahand here with my partner Tom, and we have John Newbury with us. He's an accomplished operations consultant. He's helped a ton of factories, I lose count, tons of factories and organizations, manufacturing conglomerates, level up their operations game. So super excited to have Tom with us today. Wanted to give him a chance to introduce himself, talk a little bit about himself and his background, and then we'll get right into the conversation. With that, go ahead, John.
Hey there, John Newbury. As Sahand said, I've worked in the industry 25 plus years, manufacturing, all across various functions within over 25 facilities worldwide. So with engineering, sales, operations, supply chain, shipping, pretty much every function I've worked in to improve on efficiencies, increasing productivity, down to labor, cost, pretty much everything.
That is awesome. And all of it here in Toronto, right, John?
Yeah, Toronto and all the North American sites are based in Toronto, but North America and Europe and Asia.
Amazing. That's awesome. And Tom, maybe with the two of us should introduce ourselves too, because we're not quite celebrities yet. So why don't you go ahead, my friend?
Tom Kukowski, CEO of Valkyrie Marketing, and what we do is help companies with the Industry 4.0 transition. So exciting times for manufacturing, a lot of great technology out there.
Awesome. And I'm Sahand. I run a software development company here in Toronto called Integral Software. We help businesses run better and more profitable. We work with a lot of manufacturing companies as well. Okay, with that out of the way, thank you for introducing yourself, John. And again, awesome to have you here. We wanted to take some time today to talk about sort of, what do you call it? Stories from the field. And we'll have a theme. I think a friend of mine was saying, hey, why don't we go talk about some horror stories when it comes to, years of experience in manufacturing. There's gotta be some. What I can imagine at this point is like an assembly line backing up and a ton of work in progress inventory just getting pushed back and pushing the workers out of the way. But maybe that's from a Tom and Jerry movie or a cartoon I saw when I was a kid. So I don't know, how do horror stories look like from your experience? What are some of the things that you've seen, like crazy things that you've seen in the years?
There has been many, that's for sure. There's horror stories from people. I have one down in North America. Cleveland. A gentleman found a secret button on the system, which he believed was the secret button of how to load and schedule the plant, but he hadn't set up any parameters around that report. So it would load 400 pieces every time he selected that option to do automatic scheduling and cut his work orders. So even if the customer wanted 1, 2, or 5 pieces, he had the optimum lot size of 400, and that's what he was releasing to the floor. So people coming off of the floor going, we're building so much product out there, we're really busy. And the front is like, well, we're not really that busy, we don't have much work. So there's crazy stuff, right? It's just from a secret button that he found.
That's amazing. I'm just imagining. So what were these 400 pieces being built as a result of him pressing the button, or they were just getting scheduled but not getting built? Oh,
they were being built. They were on the
amazing.
The cost in the end was around $160,000 of overage.
Wow.
Built.
So John, this was a person doing like production scheduling, and then they were just going in there, max lot, when they came in, max lot. And he had no idea that they were doing this, or he thought, or he did, or how did that, what was the disconnect?
Yeah. They did not set up any switches in the background. They just found this, they just went in the system on their own accord without talking to anyone and just, this will make me schedule quicker. I'm going to do it this way. And that's it. We had stuff in boxes already packed, half processed. Eventually, we sold that product. It had a year shelf life when it's manufactured, but it tied up a lot of cash and sat there for a long time.
That's a horror story, but it's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I can see it. You know, I can see it. Like it's just it's. I just imagine the workers like, oh yeah, we're so busy, you know, we got so much to do, right? And then you got whoever's in charge of taking orders or whatever. They're looking at the balance sheet. They're like, we don't have a lot of orders on, you know. But
well, how we noticed it was, one, the people saying there's a lot of work on the floor, and then the gentleman, the purchasing manager, is like, the material demands are out of control. And he's like, well, I've never seen things like this, right? So then people are like, what do you mean? We're not that busy, right? So it started triggering.
So just curious, we don't want to get anybody in trouble and keep it confidential. From a size of the enterprise, and we're talking about, is this a multinational enterprise? Is this a small family-run company? Like, how many shop floor employees? I mean, we're talking like hundreds of people. At this time,
there's 9 facilities in North America. And it was the smallest shop out of all of them, so it couldn't do a big mass production.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, that is a great lesson. And I think it just shows you how uncoordinated different departments can be, and we can live in our silos. And because you know, like in a small plant, you would think that, like, you know, the shop floor will be pretty quick to come back and say, like, when they got a big order, and just be like, wow, this is out of the norm, you know. But it just shows you, like, when we're in our silos and you know, order comes down the pipeline, you just got to do it. Hey, we got the order, we got to do 400, let's go.
And that, right, they just carried on as normal.
Amazing. No feedback. Like, there's no pain associated with, you know, hitting that button. It's not like it just sort of heats up if there's a backup in front of, you know, on the plant or whatever. So yeah. I get it. I mean, in software,
sounds like everybody was scrambling. Sounds like everybody was scrambling. Like the purchasing guys, like, hey, I got demand. I got to order more stuff. We're super busy. Like,
everyone's busy. Let's hire more hands, right? Like we honestly, it's funny. It's so many parallels in software and manufacturing too. I see that in some larger organizations too. That, you know, the orders come down the pipe, we got to do something. By the time it gets to the, you know, to the developers, they might be, you know, we need more hands on deck, you know, we need more people to do this. Meanwhile, I asked you to just, you know, create one widget for me. Why are you rebuilding a whole new system? But that feedback loop of not knowing the pain, not knowing the cost of what you're triggering, that's pretty awesome. That's it's just amazing how you know, press of a button. Just so what I had in mind, the Tom and Jerry scene, and it may not be Tom and Jerry, it might have been another cartoon like that, is kind of true. Like, literally, things are backing up and pushing against the person who's trying to hold everything together, and it's just not happening. That is cool. So what was the, you know, how did that go along? Like, I know that you said the inventory was just, you know, cash tied up and then eventually got sold, but how did the button problem got solved?
Well, yeah. Well,
the next person comes along basically, and, you know, they press the button.
This one didn't last very long.
Okay.
That was good, because I was supposed to be there at this facility for 2 days, and that happened, and we found out when I was actually there. So I ended up staying there for 2 weeks because that person was terminated, and then we had to figure out a new plan. But one of the main things out of that comes back to your side of the field, was reporting. Is there should be triggers in place to see these kind of things, right? And not just relying on one person pushing the button, checking the schedule. So at that point, other functions were put in place that if an order was released to the floor, would get automatic emails coming out from the system telling us this has been scheduled, and people would verify and sign off to release to the floor. If they set their own criteria, right? So if it is over certain, say 100 pieces, there used to be an additional sign off, and planning just couldn't release it straight to the floor. So we had to put a few things in play.
Right. And then sort of I guess originally the feedback loop of information was like days or weeks later when you'd see it in the accounting or anyway, and then sort of to solve it you have to have a way of kind of giving that feedback much earlier. I mean, of course the person was let go and better training for the next person who's going to push that button, but ultimately things happen, could be a mistake, and you just need the feedback faster, whether it's an alert sent to your email or if it's a report, visual or whatever feedback loop right in front of you, right? That is cool. That is funny.
Facilities not really understanding their business, right? You need to understand your business. You need to understand your capacity. What are you good at? What can you do? A lot of facilities I've been into can't tell me exactly what they're good at or how much of what they can actually produce and what mixture of product they can produce, because many of these facilities don't build the same thing. There's many multiple setups, right? So that's where it comes really hard. If you're just making 2-ply and 3-ply toilet roll, you don't have many variables. But some of these electronic companies, they're building 18 to 20,000 different parts per month. So there's a lot more risk of what can go wrong, right? It's very custom manufacturing. China would produce in one day what North America would produce in a year.
Wow. And so why was that? Is that because they just have better machinery, or is it that the American or the North American facility was set up as more of a customization and like a job shop, heavily customization, customizable output that they had?
Yeah, different products as well. So North America is building a lot of mil-aero product, medical, that kind of stuff. In Asia, automotive was built in one facility and they only built 300 different parts a year. So they would run their same equipment for a whole week, for instance, just building one part. And again, the facilities are a big 1 million to 2 million square feet, 7,000 to 13,000 employees on site at any given time. Wow. Where in America, the largest site had, I believe, 500 individuals on site.
Got it.
And then a lot more parts here, right? So 300 parts a year in an Asia site, and then here they're doing 20,000 different parts per month.
Okay, I get it.
So this is where you get all these different variables of where, when I spoke to you, all the tools, systems, capacity planning is huge to any manufacturing facility, because you're only as good as what you know. And if you don't understand everything from your labor to your equipment to your people to your products of what you can do and what you can't do, that's where you get into trouble. So we need these systems and tools in place to understand our business and make it easier for our employees to make the decisions. I kind of always look at it, we need to provide, make everyone's job the easiest it can be. So what do they need? And we need to supply that to them to make the biggest impact on their decisions.
Right. So let's switch gears from horror stories to, because I think you were kind of going in that direction a little bit. What is some of the best tools that you've seen that helped you want to give the tools to the workers to do their, what they're best at or do a fantastic job? What are some of the examples of such tools that you've seen? And by the way, would any of them be an AS400 system? We were talking about that 2 weeks ago, but anyway, I'm joking. What are some of the best tools that you've seen that kind of enable the factory or the workers or the planners to be able to do their job really well?
So all the sites I've been in, they've pretty much got their own ERP, MRP systems. I find most their reporting is not where it needs to be. Like the information's there, but how it comes out, it's not always as easy. So I've always suggested to run a parallel reporting software alongside them. One company, the business objects was a big one for one company. So all their data reporting would be in there. That took so much time away from people's jobs running data analysis reporting, because they could run everything through business objects. They would have the report in their email, whatever time they set it to. So that made their lives a lot easier. It was across all departments. So it was all across sales, production, everyone could understand. We understood the business. Everyone used to use them reports from purchasing to shipping. So it made their life a lot easier of what they'd done. But it doesn't have to be business objects, any reporting software, right? Something that helps them do their job. And then the main things I've seen is always, I took a big interest in the capacity planning side of things, because when I first got into this, there wasn't really understanding the capacity planning in facilities, and facilities would always take on more work than they could. They would overload. It would be great for a revenue point inside, because they would break their targets and their records, but their customer satisfaction would be awful and terrible. And marketing and sales phones would not stop because of customers complaining and being upset with delayed products, bad product, that kind of stuff. So we would, if the facilities changed the way they looked at things and looked at capacity and understood their capacity and signed up to what they could do, that is how these plants were structured. And then by working on capacity and understanding capacity, we then would tie in our cycle times to product, to our equipment, and work on reducing our cycle times across the board, because we all know we're in a world of, if you can get it tomorrow, you'll pay more than if it will come in 2 weeks' time. So we would cut down our cycle time. In instance, one facility in California, we reduced our lead times from a standard 20, 30 days down to 70% of the business was 10 days or less. But by doing that, we changed no labor, no people. We just reduced the whip on the floor and tried to understood how to build things a lot quicker. And they increased their revenue by about 1.2 million per month. And they actually built less product. And the reason is because they built it in 1 to 10 days. They were charging 100, 200% markup. So they were making a lot more money for building it less, but they were building it quicker.
Right. And what, just for my benefit, what kind of a company was it? Like a mold injection, or like high volume, or was it a job shop type of a?
So PCBs electronics. It was
PCBs, right? Okay.
A lot of the product they would build was Google and Apple prototypes.
Oh wow, that's awesome! Super cool.
So I think
Tom,
John, what you said, John, really spoke to me about capacity, because I run into this a lot. I feel like a lot of companies first don't know their capacity, don't think about their capacity. And I was just curious, in your experience, like, what do you think is the root cause of that? Because my background is industrial engineering when I went to school. So that's like one of the first things like I try to figure out is like, okay, what's my cycle time? Where's my bottleneck? Here's our capacity, right? Like that's like the first thing I do in any process. But it's like inherently, it seems to escape a lot of companies. Why do you think is that?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of factors, right? It's just a business that was a lot of people buy equipment and they look at the equipment, what the equipment can produce. There's always a number, but there's a reason why people sell their equipment for being so good, because it can produce so much. But when you actually get the equipment in place, it can't build that much. Or is it labor? Is it operations? I've been in facilities where the numbers they provided me are their wish numbers, that's their capacity based on what they've got loaded. But it's not, but then they look at 2 or 3 years of data and they've never produced that amount. So I always look at it capacity wise. I start at the point of what have you demonstrated over the last 2, 3, 4 years based on your labor? Then what can we do to increase our capacity, or why are we not even hitting our capacity numbers that we should be doing? Can be equipment issues. I always look at equipment, and if it's supposed to do 1,000 a day, I always take it down to 70% of that. And I use a rule of thumb of 70% green light time. So my goal is to hit my 700. If I can get my 700, I go to 750, 750, 800. But then I always look at manufacturing have to demonstrate that they can hit their numbers for 60 to 90 days before I increase capacity to sales. and let them start loading. Because if I can do it for a week and we tell marketing, they'll just keep loading us and loading us and loading us, and then it could be a problem, right? But there is many variables. It's a very good question. There is a lot of variables in capacity. Certain people, right? I've seen the night shift can do 2x on the day shift.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I find on the day shift, especially in the electronics industry, all the engineers are on the day shift. So all the science projects are run on the day shift. So now they've reduced by 50% capacity, right? Because we've got all these test jobs, shut the line down, let's do this. And nighttime, the guy's not getting disturbed. He can hit his numbers, no problem. He just keeps running and running. So capacity is different on every shift, different employee.
John, that's universal. I was a second shift lead at one point in my career, and I can tell you, like, that is universal. When you're on first shift, you have all the administrators inside the plant, the marketing, sales, tours, visitors. Every distraction you can imagine is always on that lead shift. And in the off shifts, it's really just like the core that is there to keep the plant running. That's it. So no projects, no. Like for me, it was reporting. Like when I was on first shift, the whole time I'm creating reports. Like everybody's looking for some kind of report, something. When I ran second shift, it was just taking care of the product, taking care of my people. That was it. Like didn't have to worry about any reporting and any million questions. So I think that's there is something about the off shifts being more productive, and it's I think it's universal.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's funny, you hear the same thing about like working remotely, how it's great for productivity, not so much for, projects and creativity in some scenarios, but I'm a big old school, go to the office kind of a guy. But anyway, but it is true for, especially in the knowledge economy, you can't run a factory remotely, but like, legal reviews, finance reviews, anything that could be just, sent around on a proper system, or even if it's Excel or Access, that's okay. We can help you. But anyway, the productivity does go high up because there's no distractions, right? No project work.
But like in your experience, what do you think? Do you think that adding multiple shifts is the right way to go? And then if so, what are the things that systems or processes in place to make that smooth transition? Or how would you address a customer that's got hesitations about it?
Yeah, it depends on the business. It depends on, does the increase in business support a second shift, or is it just a skeleton shift? I think reporting itself is fine, and you just you need a solid lead or manager on that off shift. I used to like the off shift wars, to say, because I used to set targets within some facilities who could get the records, right? So they would compete against that to say, I want to do 1,000. Oh, I'm going to do 1,050 because they wanted to beat the other shift. So I kind of used to encourage clients to get them wars going. But yeah, I've been in some businesses where the bottleneck was a certain process. So we didn't need a second shift across the board. I just needed 2 individuals to run one department. And we actually increased that business by 20% by doing that. So yeah, you have to look at everything, right? Because we've all got our bottlenecks, we've all got our capacity constraints or drums in the business. So do you need a full second shift, or just do it slowly? I always like to add a few people, see what happens. If it keeps going the way it should be, and then you'll find your stop gates and just keep adding and adding to that. There's many things you can do, right? It's just like, to answer, it's very tough. I can just go by what I've experienced. But yeah, I've seen it work slowly. I've seen facilities where they've hired 40 people, like dam busters, to get a third shift even and build up their second shift to a full shift. And it crashed because they done it too quick. And they started going too quick before we started getting more quality issues, more technical issues, more equipment issues. We didn't have engineer support on the off shift in these facilities. We actually created more problems within the business. And then the day shift wasn't as active as they normally were because they were fixing issues left over from the second shift. So you do really need to think about all the variables that can come into play.
Yeah, I was going to say there's one business that both of us may have looked at, which also real estate and the amount of space you have for work in progress inventory becomes the bottleneck. So adding a shift, unless the shift is related to organizing that space, it won't do much. But one thing that I was interested in asking you, John, which is, it applies outside of manufacturing. So the answer in manufacturing might be different, but what are your thoughts? Like you said, sometimes you just add people to a shift or add people to a process and see what the response of the full system is, and then you tweak it. What about adding extra hours of the same people, like overtime? How do you see that? Or have you experimented with that? Or in manufacturing, because it's so process oriented, it doesn't matter if it's person A or B, you'd rather switch to B and relieve A rather than asking for consistent overtime from person A. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question as well. I've been in another facility, smaller shop, and they didn't want to get a second or a third shift. So we looked at that solution. The solution was to run our overtime. So we had full overtime Saturday and Sunday. But then the problem was, some people didn't want to do it, some people did, but then if they had a lot of time ahead of time, they would know. So then what they come up with an A, B, C, D team. So it's like team A, you're on overtime on Saturday and Sunday, the first week of every month, and then team B and so on. So then everyone knew 4 weeks ahead of time when they'd be working on the weekend. That would be the first thing to do. I think the first thing you want to do as a smaller business is overtime before you hire another shift. I would definitely look at that first, and then go from there. And some people do a couple of hours each night as well. If your shift finishes at 4 or 5, stay till 6 or 7, they might do a little bit as well. And then if things go well and you still need a bit more, then hire 2-4 people on the second shift, right? Have them come in split from 2 till 8 p.m. or 2 till 9 p.m. and go from there, kind of thing. But definitely increasing labor is the one thing you want to look at. You don't want to do it, but obviously you have to if business is growing, and that's the way you're going, that's the direction.
Right.
I've always looked at things, it's like going in any business, right? This is what I've got, this is the group, this is the people, what is the best and most I can get out of my current people without making any changes. Where I might make some changes organisationally from supervisor to manager, or moving them in a different department, that kind of thing, or trying to get as many hours out of people as possible. But that would be your third thing you want to look at. Is even when you review a management team, right? Is it the right team to run this facility? They might not be in the right spot, but it might be the right team.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's really, it applies to not almost any business really. Initially when you're small, it's just hard to justify doubling capacity because there's not enough of a business need. And then it's not just doubling, just adding staff, but it's also adding the overhead of, adding staff. So I'm with you. From what I've seen, I'm 100% with you. And this is what we do too, and multiple businesses that I've been involved with. We do try to ask for, in a reasonable way, obviously, and well compensated overtime before we switch to actually a step function of adding new capacity. So really cool. So it applies in manufacturing too. Good to know. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, again, a fun question, is what's the closest you've gotten to coding? What systems have you? I know you are decorated in Excel and macros, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But what else have you played around with? Have you done PLC programming?
I have not. I typically will work with the IT groups in the businesses to develop the internal custom tools or the versions of specified ones that they purchase, but I've not dabbled into that much myself. I'm normally the in-between person between what manufacturing and operation needs and getting what I want from IT, if I need their help.
That's awesome. Yeah, Tom and I were talking about that a couple of weeks back. Tom, you were saying you were fiddling around with that AS400 system, but then once you kind of played around with it and built some macros, then the IT team could take over and do it like really quickly. That in between is such a important function, right? Like being able to kind of really get deep into what is it exactly that's valuable to the business, and how can we structure it, and how can we build it with the tech team, right? And given the technology that you have at your disposal.
Yeah, I've seen in many cases, many facilities I've been to, and there's no reporting software, but they just don't use it. And the reason they didn't use it is because what they requested from their internal IT teams or software teams was this and this, but what they got wasn't exactly what they needed. So then they would just not use it. So then IT's put all this time into it rather than going back and working with IT, pushing to get what they actually want. They're like, okay, thank you. Everywhere I've been, I've seen it. Every other facility, there's these redundant reports or systems that people have spent many hours on that don't work as good as they should be. Rather than just getting in a meeting room or discussing it as a team and enhancing it to how it actually will be usable. So one thing I look at in most facilities as well is a lot of visual aids. I do a lot of capacity screens, which it's like a traffic light. And I have constraints and bottlenecks in there that change colors and that kind of stuff. So if the department, we create upper and lower limits for every piece of equipment, every department. And if it's underloaded, it will go blue and be a reaction that this is a constraint, we need more product here. If it's red, stop or get more resources there. Green, your capacity or your product's in control in that area of the department. And it triggers everyone to react, because if it's blue, it's a bottleneck, so we do need work there. So it helps management and supervisor teams. It's something that we hooked up on. Everyone's actually on the system, so everyone would have an email every morning. You could look live on your iPhone or phone to see what was happening. Any time an area went down and the WIP built up, once it went above that upper limit, as a management team, we would all get an automatic email. So we're everywhere in the world, whether it was in a facility or anywhere, we could pick up the phone and start reacting. And we could actually see the problem before it was a problem if we looked at our phones and looked at their morning reports we could contact to see what was happening. So they have a good, I think SharePoint was one thing that we used to use. That's what we used to use between hook up all our facilities. All the data was coming into there. But a lot of visual aids, computer aids on that, and then a schedule in each department. A lot of people still use paper. I have no idea why. I'm a big fan of getting these tablets up on the wall and having the areas using their own tablets, so their actual dispatch report is there for their schedule, and they could just look at it live, right? I've got the main facilities I used to be in. We used to hook up the schedule to their department, and it would actually, the system would tell them their next job to work on. Right. And it would take many variables into the equation of how we would set it up. We would set up a critical ratio, the schedule date versus the priority. We had an override where we would change a base unit on any job, and it would automatically put it to the top of the department or the whole factory. It didn't matter what date or anything was there, it would override it. So there's a lot of things we would build up in the system so we could actually understand and control our work.
Right. So this is, you've kind of talked about the completely unsophisticated stories and then some really, really fancy stuff. To the best of your knowledge, I want to get a range for, here's a different way of looking at horror stories. I want to look at, in your experience, what was the largest dollar amount you've heard of spent on a system that went, for the most part, underused? I don't know if the question makes sense, but I know there's quite a bit of underusage of existing systems that goes on. I want to know, like, what's the biggest dollar amount spent on something that went kind of not used?
Wow. Like, if you look at some of the big ERP systems in the world, so let me go back to when this company I worked for, we had 17 facilities North America, 24 in total. They were on 2 main ERP systems. There was 5 or 6 facilities on homegrown. So each year they were changing over and putting them on these huge MRP. It would cost us $1 million each time that we put that new MRP into a facility. Bearing in mind, the horror stories, they never go well anyway when you put them in. You know, they're supposed to go in and start running in 3 months, where normally it's 12 months, and you still have problems. But no company fully uses any MRP ERP system. I know with one of our business, we had 9 facilities. Actually, the one in Toronto used the ERP MRP up to 40% of its capability, and they had the highest usage in the world. On average,
Wow.
The companies that would buy this MRP system were using it up to 20-25%. So you think, if you're paying $1 million to put this system in and you're only using 15-25%, there's kind of a horror story there. You're really overpaying it, and the company's not really understanding what they're buying. They're just buying everything.
Right.
Because most MRP systems are all set up in modules, and they're very smart, right? It's like, oh, you need that bit of information from that module to use this module. So in the end, you end up buying pretty much every module. So you're running your production side of it, you've got your sales side of it, you've got your purchasing side, you've got your cost analysis side that you need to get for this, the engine. It's all comes into play. And I've seen companies pay $100,000 for a software reporting system and never used.
All right. So as we get closer to the sort of the end of this segment with John, I wanted to see, Tom, is there anything else you wanted to ask John to cover before we let him go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, John, you work with a lot of different manufacturing companies, operations. You know, what is, when you first meet a new manufacturer or you walk into a new operation for the first time, what's the first thing that you look at or the first question you ask?
There's a lot of questions I'd want to ask. The first one is, you know, it's what are they looking for? What are we here for today, kind of thing, right? Because there's so much you can look at. I've been in facilities where I've been asked just to look at labor. I've been in facilities where I'm just asked to look at supply chain. How deep do we want to go, right? Because typically, when I worked for one company, I'd be in each site pretty much every month doing an internal audit, from order entry, from an RFQ request, all the way through to shipping. So I'd go with the process all the way through to sales, to engineering, before it was released to the floor, then on operations. So I'd set up with managers, leads, I'd be on the floor. But really, it's what are we there to do, right? Because there can be, when you're looking at your project, it could be a week thing. It could turn into months. And when you look at continuous improvement and operational excellence, it continues. Once you fix all the 20 issues that they have provided to you, you're going to create other ones. If you're fixing the bottlenecks move. It's just, that's why it's continuous improvement, right? It's just ongoing. But yeah, our first meeting someone is you're trying to get as much information as you can.
I just love that. I think that's a Twitter line right there. When you fix the bottlenecks just move. I mean, that is like so profound. That's awesome.
Yep. Thank you.
That is awesome. Okay, well, I think we're at a good spot to thank John for his time for us. It's awesome to see you every time, John. Learn something new every time we talk. So really, really appreciate you being with us. I think our audience will really appreciate your insights, and hoping that we'll have you back and have more conversations together. But really, really appreciate your time. And from my end, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for having me. If you have any more questions, you know where I am. I'm always happy to help.